Welcome, everyone. I know that numbers of folks are just now joining in. Hi, my name is Jenny Whitener, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to Conscious Leadership, How to Lead with Success. Today's webinar is a part of our Inspire series where we invite leaders from around the world to share their inspirational stories around innovation, leadership, and change. And we have an outstanding program for you today. We're very excited to have you join us. So if you would just start by using the chat to say hello, maybe introduce yourself and your organization. That'll also help our presenter, our guest presenter today, to get to know you. And so that would be fantastic. Thank you, Bridget. I see that she's already started by saying hello from Thrive Regional Partnership. So glad that you are here with us today. And if others would also do the same, that would be wonderful. So again, welcome today to Conscious Leadership, How to Lead with Success. Let's move along. So as we're welcoming everyone today, on my next slide, you'll see that I just want to welcome you to the Bridge Innovate community and our Inspire series. Rossina Gil is just fantastic. We'll get to meet her in just a moment. And she's offered to share with us some key insights today that will be, I think, really informative and expanding all of our perspectives around leadership and how to embark on that journey in a better fashion. So let's continue on. When we think about our inspiration and the work what you do at Bridge, just to know a little bit about us and our community, we believe in strong partnerships that are built on integrity. We believe in collective wisdom, and that's a lot of what we're doing in this Inspire series is sharing that collective wisdom across leaders. We believe in human-centered design and that it is a competitive advantage for organizations today, and that foresight, looking at future trends, analyzing future disruptions, are a part of building bold strategy and innovation. And we also believe that not only is innovation good for growth, but innovation is good for our communities. And that's a part of why we're doing the Inspire series, to share these free webinars with people around the world. So welcome everyone today. We move on to our next slide. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Rossina Gil. And Rossina is the owner of Corporate Looking Glass. She has over 20 years of experience in the leadership development arena. And I'm just so thrilled to have her here today. So Rossina, would you start by introducing yourself a bit more and getting us started on your program?
Thank you, Jenny. Yes, of course. I'm originally from Los Angeles. I've been living in the Nashville area for 10 years. I find it to be the most beautiful place in the United States. Of course, I've seen other beautiful pockets all around the country, including where I'm sure you are based now here in the South. Thank you for attending this session. It is a very quick session, so if you have any questions, please feel free to place them in the chat room, and we may have some time after the program for some more discussion. So without further ado, I shall begin. The agenda that we have for today's short session includes decision making. So this is really discussing at a high level the process of the neuroscience behind decision making before we talk about a little detail of what true leadership ties into profitability. How does it? What does it do? And then we'll have an opportunity to explore some possible candidates for your recruitment before we end with some critical thinking. So that's what I've had laid out for you today. Now, some of you may be thinking, and if you'd like, you can also place it in the chat room, how quickly do we make decisions? Now, what we find is that if you have a number in your head, that most people, so 7 out of 10 or roughly 69% of people with studies done on large groups such as 2,000 Americans at a time, how is it that we make decisions and how quickly do we make decisions? And most people will say that they make decisions before a person has even had an opportunity to speak. So in roughly 2/10 or basically 20% of 1 second, will we find that people have made that split decision on how they choose to move forward. So just to give you a quick test of what that's like, let's have you answer the following question. You will have a 5-second time to decide who is the most likely to socialize with you outside of work. So in these 5 seconds, who is the most likely to socialize with you outside of work? All right. Now we're going to have a poll for you to tell us who was that person who you chose. Okay, you have just a few more seconds. Select who was the person you were most likely to socialize with. Closing in 3, 2, 1. Okay. Here is what we found for those of you who took the poll, that most of you chose the second individual. Now, if anyone would like to unmute their mic, so we have no one who selected the C candidate, I'll take you back there for you to see. Would anyone like to say what led you to say, all right, I think this person is the most likely to socialize with me outside of work? Kindly unmute your mic, or if you choose to type it in the chat room, please do. I'd love to hear from someone who chose the candidate A, actually. This is a picture I chose directly from LinkedIn. I have no clue who this person is, but it is a LinkedIn profile picture. Would someone please, the person who chose candidate A?
So, Rossina, I didn't choose candidate A. This is Jenny. I chose candidate D because I'm working a lot right now with students who are involved in technology and young professionals who are also, so that it was drawn to the technology piece of this and sort of the young persona look of that person, that's who I'm engaging with a lot, kind of learning from that younger generation right now on some projects we're working on. And so that's what initially, and of course I have college students in my household. So that's what drew me to that person.
Thank you, Jenny. Yes, so what some people have said for candidate A is, looks like the type of person who I can have a beer with after work. Candidate B, or person B, that this person resembles the type, the group that who I hang out with most. So it's just discovering our comfort zone and what drives us to make decisions. It's usually more of what our comfort level is, not so much on any facts. It's just what we think is, okay, this works for me, or if it doesn't. So when we talk about, move past this, when we talk about working with a number of people who are very different from each other. So over here on the left, you see diverse teams. So let's say by age, by faith, by weight, height, by race, ethnicity, by anything, you have a diverse group. Here over here on this axis, you have productivity, and we can add creativity to that. Where would you say, if someone would be bold to unmute the mic, where you would have a very large group of diverse teams within a company and you would have high productivity? How would that graph look?
And
I'll
I
give you a
just want to
second.
say that if you would like to speak, go ahead and raise your hand and we will allow you to talk. So if you click raise hand, you'll be able to speak.
Now, some of you may be thinking that it looks like this. Now, if that is what you were thinking, that's what I would call the politically correct answer. What we've found by a number of independent researchers, including Dr. Carol Kolak from UCLA and Dr. Scott Page from University of Michigan, is that what you have is what is known as a bimodal distribution, where you have a lot of ineffective teams that are highly diverse over here on this side. So high diversity, low productivity and creativity or innovation. And over here you have highly effective teams that are very diverse with high levels of productivity and creativity or innovation. And the one driving factor here is how it's managed. So basically boiling it down to the people leader. How much inclusion is there in trying to uncover, how did you see things that way? Let me understand your perspective versus, okay, you're from a different background and you have to get with the program here. Highly exclusive and not inclusive. The people management relegates people to feeling as though I'm not seen, I'm not heard. But really using that difference that they bring into the situation, the unique characteristics and traits, enables you to have a higher level of productivity because you bring in some what we call healthy conflict or challenges into the environment where people can then start to see things from a different perspective, which only adds to how you choose to move forward. So that's one huge driver. And how is that enabled? How is the people leader enabled? That person's supervisor, how does that person really develop that people leader? Do they do what we call a skip level meeting, meaning to meet with the direct reports of the person who is the direct report who you have and hear how things are going? How are they being led in a way that would lead to more innovation as opposed to stifling the perspective that others bring into the equation? So what we find is that when we are talking about people from diverse backgrounds, in many cases, let's say in the 80s, we found it to be predominantly a focus on women, and then gradually it became the millennials and so on. We look at now a lot of the civil strife that we have. It's always been there, but most especially in the last year. So when we look at diversity and inclusion, it needs to be a C-suite priority, because what we find is that 88% of CEOs have thoughtful and convincing D&I mission or vision statements. I just spoke with one of the largest companies here in Nashville. Can their CEO be able to articulate the vision or mission statement? Absolutely, without question, without hesitation, yes. Now, how is it that they're managing that? Because when we look at these other two circles here, only 39% require their direct leadership. So we're talking about the successors or the one level down, let's say SVPs or VPs, actually require their direct leadership team to report on D&I metrics regularly. So I would say on a monthly basis, maybe a quarterly basis. And 29% tie the diversity and inclusion performance to compensation. So when you have that direct tie of performance to compensation, which is how corporations normally behave, how they normally handle things, then you have movement. It hasn't been done with the large majority of corporations, tying the diversity and inclusion performance into the compensation. Here's an example. As you can see, just from last year, June 12, 2020, what was published, because it's actually been, I would say, 8 years, that Facebook, for example, has gone from a workforce that's 3% Black or African American to 3.8% in the past 6 years. And I would say that it's been 8 years. Others are also in the low single digits. And during this time, I might add that they have had a very qualified candidate, in my opinion, rather young African-American woman who got a degree from Oxford University and then went to get her law degree at Georgetown, if I am correct. And yet we have had a 0.8% increase in all this time. So that's just pointing out one where tech companies say that they value diversity, but where is the action? Where are we seeing that there is a lack of connection here? Now, the lunch interview, and here we have the candidates already visible for you to see. But candidate A, as you can see, consults with astrologists, married and has a side chick, smokes and drinks martinis. But candidate B was fired twice, married, tried opioids in college, and wants to work remotely so he can wake up at 8 a.m. and work in bed for a few hours. And here we have candidate C, who's a military veteran, single but has a girlfriend, vegetarian, an author, and drinks an occasional beer. Now, if you were to have your colleague go on vacation and you are left with interviewing these candidates, and yet you don't know who any of these candidates are, maybe it's a Zoom interview, but if you were able to have a lunch interview with them and they're telling you this information, you're jotting down the notes, and you share those notes with your colleague may know who these people are, and your colleague is going to be judging based on the notes that you've collected. Now, the notes are correct from your point of view, and yet have you been able to dig deeper into trying to understand, well, what was it that drove that person to get into a situation where he ended up being fired, and twice, no less. Maybe those reasons would lead you to think, this is the exact type of candidate who I want. A person who stood up for his values and that those values were important to the integrity of the organization. That's a loyal candidate. And yet this person, when you read, yes, it's a fact, fired twice, that may stand out to you as something that you do not consider as someone who you would care to hire. So successful in different ways, but when you look at just the notes, you see that candidate C is the individual that most people opt to select simply based on the information, not on being able to know more about the individual and add your perspective into the situation. Any questions? So I'll tell you a quick story about when the Holocaust Museum was created in Los Angeles. I had taken a group down to go look at this museum. And when you come into the museum, a docent greets you, and they wait until they have a certain number in their group before we go down a short passageway towards a couple of doors. Now, the doors are marked biased and unbiased. And the tour guide said to us, I would like a volunteer. So someone had volunteered, and the tour guide said, all right, who would like to be the first person to enter the museum? And this woman proceeds to go up to the door marked unbiased. And she tugged and pulled, and she could not open the door. And so at that point, then the tour guide said, may I have another person volunteer? And this man walked straight up to the door marked biased, and he opened it. And the tour guide said, you see, we must all go through the door marked biased because we are all biased. Now, if you find that to be true, and you look at these questions for some reflection, because most growth comes from reflection, which door do you enter? And think about, why does this unsettle me, if at all? What would it mean if this were true? Do I see discomfort as a basis for personal growth? Because most people feel as though if it's uncomfortable, I don't want to talk about it. And they stonewall, which means lacking some ability to manage your emotions. And then, do I generally handle emotional stress well? Or do you, again, wish to just sort of sweep it under the rug and move forward? So that's something for you to consider as you walk through the doorway. Is it going to be biased or unbiased? It was something that really stuck with me clearly when I went to this museum, just as the first thought of, could it be that I'm biased? Now, bias could be something that's positive, as I had in one situation where I had a client who I had to debrief on a behavioral science tool. And I thought, why does his voice sound so familiar? At which point I ended up asking him, so you're based in Ohio, but I know a lot of people from Ohio and you don't sound like the other people. And he said, well, I'm from a small town closer to Kentucky. And I thought, okay. And he said, most people say I sound like Matthew McConaughey. At which point I thought, all right, pack up the kids in the car. There is a town where everybody sounds like Matthew McConaughey. That sounds good to me. So clearly a bias towards this sounds nice to my ear. And could it be that I know this person or it's just somehow familiar? So whether it is a positive or it is something that's less than favorable, outright negative, there is a bias, and that's the subjectivity that we have. It is okay to admit we all have our own bias. The issue is, how much thought are we going to offer that to connect the heart with the mind into thinking, am I going to go deeper into seeing what it is that I know to be true or feel to be true? Can I really scratch the surface and ask the questions and remain in a period of, or just sort of this state of curiosity versus immediately rushing to judgment? Because that's what we're designed to do. We're designed to get into protecting ourselves. It's sort of that limbic old part of our brain where we just rush into, here's what I perceive to be true. You might be right and you might be wrong. So how do we move forward? There is a saying in Spanish that says, or that goes, del dicho al hecho hay gran trecho. And if I were to translate that literally, it's from what is said to what is done, there is a huge gap. And so with that, I have a riddle for you. And you may have heard this before, but if there are 5 toads, frogs, as you will, on a log, and 4 decide to jump into the water, how many are left on that log? Would someone either raise your hand to be unmuted or kindly type it into the chat room? There's got to be someone who has an answer. So once again, if you have 5 frogs or toads on a log there on the water, and 4 decide to jump into the water, how many remain on the log? Luke, do we have a bold person in the audience?
Looks like we got some answers coming in the chat.
Right. So you have 0, you have 1, none. Lots of different answers coming in, Rossina.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the answer is you still have the 5 on the log because they decided to jump. That doesn't mean that they did it. And that's what we talk about with CEOs or management who say, this is what we're going to do. Talking a good game and actually walking the talk are 2 entirely different things. This sort of question is what you would see on your LSAT or to get into law school. If you have people who decide to jump, how many are left? Well, they decided. Did they actually do it? So that's why we go back to that saying, from what is said to what is done, del dicho al hecho, there is a big gap. There are people who say, like my teenage son on occasion, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it, Mom. And then do we actually get it done? Do we have it done, or do I have to follow up a couple more times? So that's where it's great to tie the performance into compensation as we have in the past. And with that, I will pass it back to Jenny.
Great. Thank you, Rossina. Fantastic. Very provocative. Some really great insights today. Thank you so much. I want to invite our participants today. If you have questions, if you'll type them into the chat, I'll be happy to follow on with Rossina and ask her some additional questions about the concepts that she shared today. So let me give them a moment to come in and see if there's any questions that come in. One of the things that comes to my mind, Rossina, you talked about the fact just this last activity where people decide to do something, but their actions need to follow through. How do you see, what's your guidance in working with leaders, especially around the diversity, inclusion, and equity component where they set these aspirational goals? What's your guidance for helping us work with leaders to actually help them achieve the actions they aspire to do? Any suggestions there?
So I usually use the SMART tool. Start off with the S is specific, M is measurable, right? A, the actionable items that you think can get you there. And then R, is it relevant in which way? Because people really want to know, if we're taking this course of action, what's the big picture here? What's in it for me? And how is that relevant to our organizational values? And then the T being the time bound. Can we actually accomplish X by this time? And if you set it up that way, it gives people a pathway into understanding, okay, this is what we're doing now. Now, what's difficult for some people within the field of D&I is to realize to actually equate D&I with conformity. That's not diversity.
Mhm.
So it's not to force people to think and behave a certain way. It is about allowing people to show up being seen and heard. What some people are referring to as psychological safety is, can I share how I think so that we can have a critical conversation? Critical thinking is what is being missed. And to have people say, well, you can only be this way, as we've also heard from especially the big tech companies, of people being perhaps let go or furloughed because they had an idea that was perhaps too conservative, then that's not walking the talk of allowing people to be seen and heard for having the views or the beliefs, the values that they hold.
Mhm.
And yet you do hear some of that out in today's society. So there is a mixture of what does diversity and inclusion actually mean.
Right. Well, I think your all the tips that you gave us today around being conscious about our leadership are very powerful, especially with the challenges that we face today in bringing unity into our businesses where we are all heard, where all perspectives are listened to, and we represent those in diverse ways so that it makes our companies more powerful. It makes our work more powerful. So, thank you so much for all of your insights today. As we think about other programs coming up at Bridge Innovate, you can check us out at bridgeinnovate.com/events. We've got a program coming up soon on building the entrepreneurial culture, tips from a senior executive who's done turnarounds all over the world. And he'll give you his insights on how to do that in your organization. And then also a session coming up with Glenda Hicks on working with boards and how to get clarity on governance between the board and the executive director, specifically with nonprofits. So lots of additional interesting, inspirational programs coming up. We hope to see you again on another Bridge program soon. Thank you so much, Rossina. It was lovely to see you today. Thank you. Take care.